Hello, everyone, and welcome to video 316 for the Legal Studies guy. Unit 3, Area of Study 1.6. That we're going to be talking about Victoria Legal Aid and Community Legal Centres. But as always, starting with a quote, Churchill. You'll see Churchill come up a few times. Contested legacy Churchill, if anyone who does history will understand that, really renowned British War Prime Minister and during World War II, really well regarded for how he led Britain during that. But outside of that, definitely perhaps some would consider responsible for some mistreatment of people in India and other parts of the British Empire. So a bit of a contested legacy, but I'll use a few of his quotes because he does have some pretty good quotes over the time, and this one's great as we're sort of starting our Year 12 journey. Success consists of going from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm. And it's just that old idea that you'll see quite a lot is that, you're not just going to keep winning no matter what. Be it sport, artistic endeavors, life in general, particularly academics, you will confront failure from time to time. And the idea of being successful is not quitting, not giving up when you fail. It's rolling on to the next thing, having that same sense of purpose and enthusiasm, and then hopefully the success will inevitably come. So, as I said today, 316, we're looking at these two organisations, Victoria Legal Aid and then the group of community legal centres as organisations. And we're focused on how they assist an accused person and victims of crime. So, we're looking at both sides of that. I guess a crime, the person who is alleged to have committed the crime, and then the person who is alleging that they have been a victim of said crime. And this is just a skill of explain, so we'll talk about what that means later on. Essentially, at the end of this video, you should be able to, if someone said to you, what role do VLA and community legal centres play, you should be able to give them a really detailed response in that regard. So let's just start really briefly with what they are. They're hopefully organisations, particularly legal aid, that you've heard of and heard mentioned before. So legal aid government funded organisation has 15 different offices around Victoria. So there's potentially one in the town that you live in. Obviously, if you live in Melbourne, they've got quite a few offices out in different suburbs, rural towns. So I'm in Horsham, and we've got a Victoria Legal Aid office down one of our main streets. But they also provide a really extensive online service. So both an online website with information and a phone service where you can phone up and talk to someone. And essentially, the whole idea of legal aid is that they are trying to ensure equal access. So there's a POJ mentioned there to the legal system for all Victorians. So it's all about information sharing and therefore hopefully engagement, which we know connects to fairness as well, which we'll talk about later on. Community legal centres, really, really similar. So they're all about offering free legal advice, support, information. So really similar to legal aid in that sense, trying to spread information that therefore increases the ability of people to access, engage with the justice system when they need to. Key thing here is in their local area, and that's that key thing of community. So legal aid is one entity that has lots of locations. Community legal centres are lots and lots of different entities that exist in a way with common purpose, but they just work in their local area or their area of expertise. So some of them, or they all generally get some funding from the government, both state and federal. They'll also work on public donations, use volunteers to try and basically, meet their purpose for what they're trying to do. Now, community legal centres can be general, so like they just provide all kinds of different legal support in all areas, so quite similar to legal aid in that sense. And they're in 21 different locations. Well, there's 21 different centres statewide, and some of those centres have multiple offices. Like there's I think it's like a northern Melbourne. I can't remember the exact name, but they might have across the northern suburbs like two or three different offices that, but they're the one community legal centre. But there's also a bunch of different legal centres that are what we call specific community legal centres, and they just work in one area of law. So, there's a community legal centre that focuses on, say, animal welfare. There's a bunch that work on employment law, family violence, focus on that. Particularly, there's one located in Warrnambool called Anna House that's all about supporting female victims of domestic violence, and all the different legal issues that can come from that. So again, all about in the area that they're in, either community wise or specialising. They're again trying to provide support, advice, information to help people navigate the legal system who might not be able to access it otherwise, just like legal aid is. So, let's focus on legal aid first, then we'll jump to community legal centres. Even though there are a lot of similarities, we'll just separate them to go through the work that they do. As I said, the purpose of legal aid: equal access to the legal system, regardless of personal circumstances, particularly financial. Um, where possible, this is all out of Legal Aid's basically charter of operation. It's a legislated body, which means it's created by an act of Parliament. So Parliament voted Legal Aid into existence, and their charter all comes from that, and that's that they want to prioritise prevention and early resolution of legal problems, so support people to resolve their problems without hopefully going to court, and education. So they have quite a strong education section. So if you have a legal aid office in your community, you might be able to access them for some educational resources, and they often go around to schools and do talks, which is potentially something that you guys have been able to access as well. The key language in the study design is the role of. So we're talking about the role that they play. And this is where we want to get, and I'll show you some sample answers later. We want to start getting a little bit more specific about, hey, this is one thing they do, or this is another thing they do, or this is a third thing that they do. Um, Primarily, and probably the simplest to jot out straight away, is this idea of one role of Victoria Legal Aid is to provide free legal information. So free is a really important word there, and information. So information being um, processes, procedures, your rights, what different types of offences are. If you're going to court, what this hearing is, what this person does, where this thing is. And they do that primarily, as I said, through their extensive website. It's really worth going to have a look. And they might be able to provide some of that information if you ring them or go into their office. They have lots of different fact sheets. We'll talk about duty lawyers in a moment and how they provide information to people who are going to court. So really, really key term there. Free is important, and legal information. So they're informing people about the justice system. And particularly if we're focusing on an accused person, that would be informing an accused person about their rights, what's going to happen when they go to court, the processes, who's going to be involved. Because an accused person might not know that. They're not doing legal studies like you are. Then another distinct role could be free legal advice. So this is sort of an extension. It's not just info now where you need to read it and figure out what to do. Sometimes legal aid can provide free legal advice. So this might be advising you on the burden and standard of proof, your specific crime, what the elements are, what's going to be the next steps, what options you have. And this is where you might then, be calling up and speaking to someone, or you might be making an appointment at one of their 15 offices around the state. So a little bit more extensive than information is now advice. Hey, what do you need to do from here? Not just, hey, here's some stuff that might help you have a read. And I'll skip duty lawyers for a minute, where legal aid can go, and this is perhaps where sometimes we get confused with this idea of a lot of American TV shows where it's like you have the right to a lawyer. If you can't afford one will be given to you. Is, I guess, this misconception sometimes that legal aid just hands out lawyers. Hey, their job is to give you a lawyer. It's not that at all. What role legal aid can also play is this third one here, is where they can provide ongoing legal representation, so that you can get ongoing legal support, and you can have someone who comes into court and advocates for you, so like a lawyer with you in the courtroom. But they don't do this all the time, and they only do this if you meet eligibility requirements, which I'll talk about in a moment. And it's through what's called a grant of legal assistance. So this is the idea that, generally speaking, if you're approved or if you meet the eligibility requirements for legal aid, they'll give you money, a sum of money, and you will then use this money to pay for a lawyer. So they won't give you a lawyer, and they do have, they do employ in-house lawyers, and they use them as duty lawyers sometimes, and they will sometimes use in-house counsel to represent people. But generally speaking, how they provide ongoing legal support is by giving you a sum of money. And what actually happens in practice is a lot of lawyers, like particularly I know some lawyers in the town I'm from, that if you go and see them and the lawyer recognizes that you'll meet the eligibility requirements, particularly if you're a young person, um, they'll actually have the legal aid forms with them. They'll help you fill out the application, prove that you meet the eligibility requirements, because then they know they're going to get paid. They're going to get paid by legal aid to represent you. So that's how legal aid really operate in terms of three sort of, in a way, escalating roles: information, advice, and then in some circumstances representation. This one's probably a fourth one, and I should have probably put it at the bottom, and that's the idea that they also offer what are called duty lawyers. So this is in the magistrate's court, and this is where they basically have someone sitting at court. And if you are going to court on the day of your hearing, they can also give you information, advice, and then some circumstances in court advocacy or support. So sort of like those first three roles that I mentioned. And again, to get that in court advocacy, you have to meet a bunch of requirements. So you have to meet an income test, and have to be facing what's called a significant charge. So there's a chance of jail. They'll provide information only, which is like fact sheets if you're facing a minor charge. And then advice, you might get a bit more advice if you're facing more or less a mid-level charge and you don't necessarily meet the priority requirements for legal aid. So duty lawyer is a specific role that they provide, but in terms of hierarchy of sort of understanding and remembering, I'd focus on definitely 1, 2, and 3. Now, in terms of being eligible for a grant of legal representation, it's just worth highlighting that to get legal aid to give you money, they will want to know or check what your case is about, the likely benefit to you of having a lawyer. So basically, is it worth them giving you the money? Will it benefit the public? AKA, is it, in the best interest of the community? Usually, yes. Having someone represented is better than having them not, but they have sometimes denied people based on that, which I'll talk about a bit later on. But this is obviously, or usually the big one, is your financial situation. So to get legal aid to give you money for a lawyer, you're going to have to prove that you can't afford a lawyer otherwise. And there's actually statistics out there that the eligibility requirements for legal aid and the number of people that therefore they support is actually less than the number of people that are considered below the more or less the poverty line. So the eligibility requirements are a little bit contentious around how much access is legal aid providing through grants of legal assistance. Community legal centres, we can rush through these a bit quicker now that we've sort of gone in depth into legal aid. Purpose, again, really similar. Ultimately, the purpose is equal access to the law regardless of personal circumstances, particularly in light of personal circumstances. If you can't, generally, if you've got money, you can access the legal system without needing extra support. Like you can just go and pay for a lawyer. Often it's the people who have challenges that can't access the legal system properly that therefore VLA and CLCs are supporting. Each community legal centre might have a differing purpose depending on whether it's a general community legal centre or a specific one. But again, overall, equal access to the law. So again, role of uh, or specific language from the study design is role of legal aid and community legal centres, and we want to talk again roles of community legal centres in relation to an accused, and it's the same wording. It's pretty much the same roles. Free legal information, number one. Okay, both in person through websites. So they often operate extensive websites, just like VLA does, and it's that same information: processes, procedures, rights, etc. Uh, Free legal advice, similar to VLA, so that level up in some circumstances. Um, and some, not all, some might offer ongoing legal representation, so that next level. Um, and often this is, through pro bono arrangements, which is where you don't pay. What is probably the more likely thing, though, and this is exams have shown that this is an accepted and a good answer as a role of community legal centres, is that they'll actually do this, which is they will help you apply for a grant of legal assistance. So a community legal centre will see you, give you advice, and that advice might include, hey, you should apply to get some money from legal aid. We think, looking at your stuff, that you're going to meet the eligibility requirements. We'll help you fill out the forms. We'll help you do the application. Then you'll get some money from legal aid and you'll be able to pay for a lawyer. And whether that's paying for a lawyer then from that community legal centre, if they have one available, or whether that's paying for a lawyer in the community. But that's very much a specific role of a community legal centre, is that application for support from VLA. So a really, really good one to use. Now, victims. This is new in this study design. So the old study design was just role of legal aid and community legal centres in assisting an accused person. Now it's role of VLA and CLCs in assisting an accused person and victims of crime. So first and foremost, the first role you can do here is just this first one: information and advice. That really general. If you're a victim of a crime, just like an accused person, you can use the websites of VLA community legal centres. You can call them up and find information. What are the processes and procedures? VLA has information on, for victims, on how you report a crime. Talking to the police, what avenues you have once you've reported a crime, what the processes will be, what will happen if you need to be a witness. All of that stuff is, again, a role that they play in assisting victims, is information and advice. So that's really, really basic. It's the same as an accused person. Where it gets more specific is, and partially this is why I think it's been included, is that Victoria Legal Aid and some community legal centres, and the some community legal centres are a lot of these ones I've listed here. So you've got like Ballarat and Grampians Community Legal Centre for people who live out in the west of Victoria. Mallee Family Care, that's a community legal centre up near Mildura. The Inner Melbourne Community Legal Centre, Gippsland. Jira is a community legal centre that supports Indigenous Australians who've been charged with crimes. There's a women's legal service, Eastern, there's a bunch of them. Together with Victoria Legal Aid, they have commenced operating this thing called the Victims Legal Service. So it's effectively legal support just for victims. And it's to assist victims who are applying to this thing called VOCAT, or the Victims of Crime Assistance Tribunal. So one thing that victims are able to do is they're able to put in a free application. It doesn't cost them anything, but they might need support to do it, which is where the Victims Legal Service comes in. And they can apply to the Victims of Crime Assistance Tribunal. And you need to provide receipts, and you need to provide records, because VOCAT's only going to give you money for things that effectively you've spent money on. But they can basically cover the cost of things like perhaps counselling as a result of a crime that you've suffered, loss of income if you can prove loss of income. If you've had to travel to court to be a witness, they might be able to pay for your travel costs. If you've had to stay overnight somewhere, the accommodation side of things. And VLA and CLCs can make it easier by helping you do this application. So that's what VOCAT's there for. The other thing that victims have available to them is these things called compensation or restitution orders. Now, Victims of Crime Assistance Tribunal can help you as a victim even if a person is not convicted of a crime. You just have to show that you've applied or you've reported the crime to the police and the police invest. They don't even have to charge someone, and you might be eligible for some form of compensation. Is not the right word, but um, basically some form of money to pay for services that you've used. If a person is convicted of a crime, you can also then do an application to the court for a compensation or a restitution order. So this is for things like particularly pain and suffering. So if someone's actually then convicted of a crime, you might be able to put in an application to the court that you want them to pay you some money to compensate you for the pain that they caused. So not like a quantifiable expense. Um, to do that, you are probably going to need legal support. And that's where, again, a role that VLA and CLCs can play is through the Victims Legal Service, where they give you that support and they help you make that application for compensation. Um, the whole idea here is that that's going to stop you or hopefully negate the need for you to start any kind of civil claim for compensation or damages. Restitution order is similar. A restitution order is around property, so the return of property that the court can force them to do. So sort of an added thing, again, that you might want to do, and VLA and CLCs can help you with that through the Victims Legal Service. So what's a role of VLA in assisting an a victim of crime? Well, they operate the Victims Legal Service, which, as a victim of crime, can support you in applying for a compensation order if someone's convicted of a crime, or applying to the Victims of Crime Assistance Tribunal. It's a really, really good role to know. This is just an added one. One thing that they're really clear, Victims Legal Service can't support you if you are a witness. They can't provide legal advice if you're a witness to a crime, which some victims like to have. CLCs may be able to support with that, or if there's any other future coronial or civil processes, CLCs might be able to support you with that. VLA can't. There is some scope, and this is very niche, and I don't think you'd necessarily want to go there as a role because it's a little hard to explain and it's very rare. I believe there is some scope for victims to access grants of legal assistance to support them with that sort of stuff, but I would stick to this that free legal aid in general and then operation of the Victims Legal Service as distinct roles that VLA and CLCs play. So this is the key skill, and I've referenced this a couple of times. It's just an explain. So explain the purposes of, and I've included the old skill there. So let's keep those annotations, and I'll change that on the fly. So this is one of the challenges with a new study design is a lot of the content is the same, but we've had effectively a rewording of some of the skills and a rewording of some of the content. So it is an explain. We're explaining the roles of Victoria Legal Aid and Victorian Community Legal Centres in assisting an accused and victims of crime. So again, the key word is explain. And one thing that we want to know when we're talking about explain is if you're asked to explain something, the key thing is that you are having to show your understanding of it. So not showing that you know something, not listing things, but providing enough detail and depth that as an examiner, someone's reading your answer and going, oh yeah, they truly understand what this means. So if you're, for example, putting forward the idea of, a role is to provide legal information, what information? What information is VLA or CLCs giving you? Do they understand what legal information is? And that's a really, really key thing. This is a past exam question from, if I remember correctly, 2021. Section 4D of the Summary Offences Act states, any person who in a public place flies a kite to the annoyance of any person shall be guilty of an offence. Explain one role of Victoria Legal Aid in assisting a person accused of flying a kite in a public place to the annoyance of another person. Okay, explain one role of Victoria Legal Aid in assisting an accused person. And it's just specific to this example. Now, again, explanation is showing your understanding, but I really want to highlight this thing here, and we'll talk about this at different times and different questions. If a question in legal studies asks you for one thing, you can only provide one. If you provide more than one, your subsequent roles, in this case, can't attract any marks. And this is a really, really important thing. So I won't dwell on these, and I'll let you pause it and have a deeper read if you really want. But I'll give you two sample answers here. And I just want to really quickly highlight this answer. One role of Victoria Legal Aid in assisting an accused person is to provide legal information. This information could include outlining what rights an accused person has, so a bit more detail, what responsibilities they need to meet, and further details about the specific crime they've been charged with. That this is a summary offence, so providing that information. It's provided through their website as well as through the dedicated phone lines. So that one's really extending on the idea of what information, so they're providing, the role is providing legal information. What information are they providing? In this case, this information. And then how is that information provided? I'm reading that and going, yeah, they really understand what that means. If I look at this second answer is also really like this kid knows what they're on about, if this is one they wrote. One role of Victoria Legal Aid is to provide legal information such as the details of the summary offence of flying a kite. Further, if the accused meets the requirements of a means test, then Victoria Legal Aid may provide them with a grant of legal assistance to pay for a lawyer to represent them. They may also have access to a duty lawyer when they attend the magistrate's court, as this is a summary offence. Provide legal information is one role. Grant of legal assistance is another role. Duty lawyer is a third role. This is a student who is scattergunning, who's providing lots and lots of content, but not responding directly to the question. So I just want to really, really highlight that. If you are asked about one role, highlight what the one role is, provide legal information, and then explain it in detail. What is that information? What is, or how is that information being provided? As with any dot point from now on, or through until we get to sentencing, we also need to be able to evaluate content in the context of the principles of justice, so fairness, equality, and access. So if you wanted to pause the video now and stop and have a think about legal aid and community legal centres, have a think about whether they do achieve fairness, equality, and access or not, you can do that. But here are some things that might help you out. So, pretty straightforward. I won't extend on them too much, but basically, if you've got a lawyer, we're hoping that you can engage better. If you can engage better, we're going to get an impartial and just outcome, compared to if you're self-represented. Now, if you can't afford a lawyer, VLA, CLCs are going to help with that. If you're better informed, you're going to be able to get, hopefully, a better outcome, the just outcome. Really, really important. So they absolutely provide fairness. Again, if you don't have a lawyer, prosecution does, or police prosecutor in a magistrate's court. Disparity. You are disadvantaged. They are a legal professional. You are not. VLA, CLC, so their information advice may be through supporting you to get a lawyer. Correct that disparity. That's equality. Also, those eligibility requirements are the same for everyone. Equality. And then access, again, it's all about your ability to, have that information, have that ability to understand what's going on, and therefore knowing your rights, engaging with the system, being able to do so in an informed manner. That's all access. It's really, really key terms from those access definitions, in an informed manner. VLA CLCs are absolutely centrally doing that. The only thing that perhaps we can argue that they don't achieve is that the asset test and the strict eligibility requirements can actually preclude people. And there's argument that they preclude too many people. And as a result, that might mean people aren't informed because they should get access and they don't, or they should be able to have a lawyer or have support. That can then lead into not getting a fair outcome, which can also obviously also mean there might be a disparity. So all those arguments fit into not fairness, not equality, and not access as well. Synthesize and apply to actual hypothetical scenarios. Look, this is a really old podcast. I don't know if it's around or hard to find anymore, but if you wanted to, try and look up a podcast called The Rule Book. They have an episode called The Most Unpopular Defendant. It's about a guy, he was uh, yeah, quite infamous in Victoria a few years ago. His name was Adrian Bailey. He was convicted of killing Jill Marr, who went missing off the street in Brunswick, and sort of her going missing gripped Melbourne and Victoria for a while. Basically, he became quite publicly well known after that. And subsequently was charged with a historical rape allegation. He wanted to plead not guilty to that, and couldn't afford a lawyer. He applied to legal aid, and legal aid refused to represent him. And it ended up being a bit of a uh, there was a legal dispute around, the idea of this guy's clearly, a horrible person. He's going to be in jail for probably the rest of his life. But should we just let him get convicted of something without legal support because of that? Or should he still be provided that opportunity to have a fair trial and get support? So that's worth a listen. Just look up the Federation of Community Legal Centres website, see what community legal centres are near you, check their websites. They might be able to, offer you some advice or information on what they do. And obviously, the Legal Aid website's absolutely phenomenal. Really, really, really good resource. You'll find that through any dot point in this study design, or particularly this, criminal and civil law. Legal Aid will often explain things that we are learning in a way better than I do, the textbooks do, your teachers do, well and truly. So the Legal Aid website is a fantastic resource. Really long video, but I think we've essentially, really drilled into what role legal aid and community legal centres are playing out there. And as a result, really, hopefully, if someone asks you that right now, you can clearly say information, advice, and then representation support in some circumstances. And they're the really three key pillars of what these two organisations do: information, advice, representation, support.